And just like we do in our regular meetings, we will try to have a little bit of a conversation. What you just heard, I wanted to make sure all of you know that we are recording this meeting, and it could be used to have other parents who were not able to make it tonight listen to this meeting. So please be aware of that as you make comments and ask questions as well. Next slide, please. So I wanted to introduce you to my PDAC team. Though many of you know me as the chair of PDAC, these are the people behind the scenes many times that are doing a lot of the work. I know somebody was helping me edit this at 1 o'clock in the morning yesterday. So just to introduce them, we have Michael Razak and Kathy Peel as our school board advisors, Jennifer Rowe, who is the executive director of educational equity for our district, and she's our direct liaison to the district. And then my team, Ginger, Rahman, Rachel, Gadir, Shelley, and Karen. And they're all here, some of us wearing our snazzy PDAC shirts, and some of us that can't find them. So, we'll deal with that later. Next slide. So for many of you, we usually take a pulse of the room, and we probably should have done a poll, but we have such a packed meeting. But I did want to go over some of the usual things that we go over in every PDAC meeting when we're in person. This is a PDAC promise that we did in 2016, which has become one of our core tenets to the district. PDAC promises to engage in active conversation concerning issues that are important to you. We promise to stand alongside you when you need an advocate. We promise to work with the district to ensure all families and students in our community feel welcomed in their respective school building and in their classrooms. We promise to continue to bring awareness to the meaning of equity. And most importantly, we promise to advance District 204's commitment to equity and educational excellence always. That last line is also PDAC's mission statement. I want to take a moment to recognize and thank our school board. If some of you had the chance to watch the meeting yesterday, they adopted a Board of Education equity statement. This has been something that PDAC has advocated for many years. We have a board that truly believes in equity and is willing to put the statement out there and make a direct kind of directive, I would say, to our now admin and staff, that equity is something that is a priority to the school board. So I know Mike Razak is on this call. I think there are quite a few other board members on this call as well. But I do want to thank you for passing this yesterday. And this is available on the IPSD website, but we also have posted it in case anybody wants to read it on our PDAC Facebook page. Next slide. Every year for the last few years, we've done a book study, which has become very popular. We partner with the libraries, we've partnered with Naperville Neighbors United, we're partnering with IPPC, and then Pages, Paces, and Paths, which are the three groups, affinity groups at all three of the high schools. And we welcome all of you to read this book with us. We will have a book study. Hopefully we will have Dr. Kendi join our meeting in February. We're still working on the final plans of that, or at least possibly both Dr. Kendi and Jason Reynolds. The book by Jason Reynolds is more of a YA book, a youth book. So please do get your children involved in reading it with you. Stamped from the beginning, Dr. Kendi's book is more of an adult book. Either book is fine to read. Both books are even better. The topics that we discuss at our February meeting will come from both books. And the library, if you are a Naperville library card holder, if you put this book on hold, and enough of us do it, I think we're very close to meeting that benchmark, it will become one of those always available books so that you can download it at any time. And then Aurora Library and Naperville Library have lots of extra copies of them as well. Next slide, please. So this is a slide we always go over at every meeting, where to go if you have a concern. Obviously, we're not in the buildings now, but this is still very much applicable to our parents. This divides the graphic into elementary, middle, and high school. This is on our website. It possibly is on most school websites, I'm hoping, and it's on our Facebook page as well. But please do try to follow this guideline if you are having any issues inside your school. It will tell you who is the appropriate person. If you need to skip one level or skip many levels, it's absolutely okay to do that. If there's a barrier somewhere, we don't want you stuck at a particular point. Please do skip a level and talk to someone else. I can tell you in the 10 plus years that I've been involved in PDAC, I have never found anyone in our admin who is not open or staff that is not open to listening to parents about their concerns. You are always, always welcome to contact anyone from the PDAC team, and we can help facilitate the conversation as well. Next slide. These are our norms. So this meeting, we are going to try to do a breakout session. So I do want to make sure that everyone understands our norms. Be on time, which all of you are here on Zoom, so that's not an issue. Stay on task, be relevant. It's about equity, be honest, be open, be respectful, and every voice counts. I know right now there's a lot going on in the world. There's a lot going on with elections. There's, so I do want to be very, very respectful when we are saying our opinion, that we are willing to listen to other people's opinions. Not everybody has the right answers. No one has the right answers. We're all trying to get through what's happening in our country and in our school district together, the best that we know how to do. It's not a perfect solution by all means, but please, as we break out into sessions and we listen to you so that we can figure out some action steps, we can look at what our parents are feeling and what is important to them, and then help maybe facilitate some solutions. So with that, someone who knows a lot about this, I'm going to call up Karen Zatz from our leadership team to introduce her friend Alix.
Thanks, Siley. I welcome tonight Dr. Alix Gallagher. She is the Director of Strategic Partnerships at Policy Analysis for California Education. And in that role, she leads partnerships with intermediaries working to improve student.
Karen, your audio is going out. Here, try it again.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Not really.
Okay, then it's going to be, let's see. I think that's kind of the best I can do. So if it doesn't work, then Sally, you're going to have to introduce her.
Okay, so I can do that. So Dr. Gallagher is the Director of Strategic Partnerships at PACE. In response to COVID, Dr. Gallagher is leveraging her knowledge of instruction and teacher learning to provide support for partners rethinking districts' instructional models as they move to distant and blended learning. I'm not going to take a lot of the time. We'll have this slide up here, but we are very, very happy to welcome Alix here tonight. I think sometimes having a more national perspective of what's going on is very helpful to us. This isn't just happening in Naperville or District 204. What we're going through is happening all over the country and really all over the world. So Alix, welcome. I know you have your slides as well, so we'll stop sharing ours, Kadir, and could you please allow Alix to share her PowerPoint?
And
Lisa, are you able to share it?
I wasn't a second ago. Let me just try again.
Okay.
Still disabled.
Jen, or can you allow her to share?
Kadir is the host right now, so she just needs to make her a co-host.
Got
Kadir,
it.
can you make her a co-host?
Yeah, I'm doing that. Hold on.
Thank you. Oh, it's great to see everyone's faces. I just saw.
While we're waiting to share, one of the things I was wondering is what people are interested in learning tonight. I have ended up doing a bunch of different conversations like this for different groups, and people always have different questions. So one of the first things I was going to ask is, what things are you most concerned about right now, or what are you most hoping to learn? And if you would just put them in the chat right now, that would just, I will talk more or less about different things in the slide deck based on what I'm reading from all of you.
Wonderful.
Okay.
Okay, Alex, you're a
I
co-host
should
now.
work. Great, thank you. And I should have put this into slideshow already, but I can do that now. Okay. So everyone can see, correct?
Yes.
Just do one check, super. Okay. So as I was saying, although, I'm gonna lose my ability to see the chat because I'm at full screen. I'll check it in a couple minutes. So just take a minute to tell me what you're interested in, if you can, in the chat. And I will pop over. Okay, while you're doing that, I just want to give people brief information to let you know that my lifelong learning has not been focused solely on distance learning, blended learning. Instead, this is a bit of a pivot because, as my bio mentioned, my job revolves working very closely with some nonprofits that collectively work with districts serving about 1 million kids in California. And what we started hearing, not surprisingly, in the spring was that people who were principals, people who were superintendents, when schools shut, there was an amazing crisis. Overnight, everyone was trying to figure out, are we going to go back in 2 weeks? Are we going to go back? Like, what are we going to do? And their inboxes started getting flooded with, this is the tech solution for you. You need to buy this, you need to buy that. And there was both a crisis and a lack of knowledge and too much information at the same time. And so at PACE, given our role, bringing kind of trying to bridge policy and practice by bringing research in accessible ways, we kind of stepped into what was in some cases a real knowledge gap to try to translate what sense could be made from the existing literature for the present situation. And it's really important to know that actually there wasn't research that directly applied to this problem last spring, because part of the problem here is scale. We do have a research base that tells us about how teaching and learning works very well for the most kids. We do know things about how to help students who are behind or who have particular learning challenges, additional learning needs. And we do know things about how online, remote, and distance learning can work. But a lot of that, the last bit of research has been done in the past on people, students and teachers alike, who have selected into online learning environments. And also it's more older students. And I think it's really important for all of you to know as I go into this that the research base where we are right now is still a place where we're taking basic understandings of teaching and learning and online learning, and we're trying to figure out how to translate them at scale to systems that are still in crisis. And I think that's just a really crucial context to understand. The second thing that I think we need to think about, I'm going to talk about teaching and learning, but there are a few elephants in the room, to use that metaphor. The first is childcare. As my bio mentioned, I'm the mom of 2 kids. I'm a single parent, so I have 2 kids doing distance learning from my house all day long while I'm working, which I actually think is a really, really good thing for my empathy for the situation. And I will say that I feel personally very lucky that my kids are both teenagers. And so there are challenges and helping them out with homework or whatever else exists, but they have tech skills, they have attention spans that are more than 5 minutes. And I'm a very lucky, privileged person. And there are lots of people who have very, very fundamental struggles right now. And we have to understand when we talk about teaching learning that there's actually a hierarchy of needs, and teaching and learning isn't always, it cannot right now be the only thing we think about. We need to understand that kids are having, in some cases, real, very basic physical challenges around their basic food, housing needs, around stresses in their lives. They may have family members who are sick. They may be attempting school in an environment where there's trouble, trying to find a distraction-free space, much less an adult to support them or an older sibling to support them. The older siblings may be trying to do their own school while supporting younger siblings. It's the actual physical being in school is some degree of an equalizer in our society, even though there are differences across schools. And to the extent to which kids are at home, there is, or in some other place where they're being supervised by family members or someone who is not a trained certified teacher whose job it is to provide them the social, emotional, academic, respond to their social, emotional, academic needs. We have to realize that those environments play in as well into students' learning experiences. And so I'm going to talk largely about the teaching and learning portion of this, but I really don't want people to forget the broader context, because all of those factors vary a lot, student by student, probably both within your schools, across the schools in your district, and definitely across districts in this country. And so when you're knowing that you all are thinking about equity, I just wanted to put that front and center in everyone's mind, even while diving in next to the teaching and learning issues. And so I wanted to start by talking about what we did learn from 2020. And the first thing is, I think, really, really hard and important to wrestle with, which is that educators worked really hard in general, and they continue to work hard. A side study I'm launching right now is looking at the real danger of burnout at educators in all levels of our system, teachers, school administrators, district administrators. They are working really hard, and depending, I don't know your local political environment, but in some cases, no matter what decision an administrator makes, are we going to do hybrid? Are we not going to do hybrid? Are we going to go back? Are we not going to go back? They're going to get yelled at by both sides. And teachers as well are sometimes trying to balance issues with doing their professional job. Should they do it in school where they're comfortable and they get all the intrinsic rewards and get to use the skills they've built for a long time? But what are the health and safety safeguards around that? And no matter what teachers choose right now, in some places, definitely an issue in California, I can speak less to you locally, people are mad at the teachers for that choice. And so we have to understand that the educators are working really hard. All of that notwithstanding, many families were really unhappy with the results last spring. Reports so far seem fall is going a bit better, but understanding that context of both really hardworking educators and yet very unhappy families is really important. It's also really important to understand that school isn't solely about academic learning. There's also social interaction and very important social emotional needs that get met at school. And on top of that, that social emotional needs and academic learning are intertwined because we are human and we are social creatures. Third thing, we talked a lot last spring and continue into this fall to talk about technology. And technology access is really necessary, but it's not sufficient. We actually need to rethink instruction to make it work in digital only and hybrid environments. I also wanted to highlight just some of the causes of inequities last spring. We talked about them a bit. There's a digital divide in this country. There are some pockets where students cannot get good Wi-Fi, don't have access to it, and also there are often not enough devices for digital learning. Non-school learning environments I mentioned. The other thing that we saw as an outcome of last spring, you may have heard the term in general, this idea of summer slide, that over the summer, some students' skills regress because they are not having academic experiences. Given the lack of engagement some students had last spring, some students experienced about a 6-month, and I'll say summer, just in terms of the slide, 6 months without the types of academic supports for academic learning they might have had, which means that teachers in many cases now have classes that they always have a range in where students are. And right now that range is even larger than it might be in a typical year. Lastly, there's a very important district role in equity. We saw districts and states across the country, depending on what your policies were. Policies set a floor for the types of experiences kids get. And so it's really important that districts set clear expectations for instruction, meaning what is it going to look like? How much is it going to be? How much will be synchronous, for example? How much is happening at the same time? But also districts and states, someone, not just classroom teachers independently on their own, needs to help identify some of the distance learning resources that are out there and support teachers, because as I'm about to share, they're pretty radically different pedagogies that are needed to really help kids learn in digital and blended models. So I want to start in a place that I don't normally start, talking to people who aren't in academia, which is in sociology and theory, because there's this idea of real school. And what that means, and it was developed actually by lovely professor Mary Metz. But what she talked about is the fact that in our society, we share certain expectations of what school looks like. And I put a picture of what people think of when you think about, oh, what is school? There's a teacher there are kids kind of in rows, they're writing on stuff. We have a picture in our mind of what school should look like. And what I'm going to try to help you do in the course of this conversation is replace that picture with a different understanding of learning that isn't based as much on kind of how a classroom is laid out and what people are doing physically, behaviorally, but instead is thinking about the types of learning activities that kids need in order to learn, and get to this point where we understand that if we want kids to learn equally in a distance or blended hybrid learning environment, we actually have to structure school differently. And some of the things that we're used to seeing might not happen. They are less likely to be compatible with the best types of learning experiences. So I want to talk about a distance learning pedagogy and go back to an earlier 2013 literature review, which talked about 3 types of learning experiences that kids tend to need to have. And the first is about delivering information. And we think of that kids reading, they could be watching videos, they could be listening to a lecture. Information is being presented, new facts, new demonstrations. But kids also need to do things to process those. And again, it can be a wide range of things. It could be a worksheet. It could be using manipulatives to actually practice doing something. This idea that kids have to do something active, they don't just passively receive information, is really central to good teaching. And lastly, students need to work together with peers or a teacher and interact with the content in order to learn well. And the peer working is super important because it meets some of the social needs students have, but students also, especially when it's well facilitated and teachers have created a really good supportive learning culture in their classroom, can really push each other's ideas and build on each other's thinking in ways that help drive to kind of the highest levels of rigor. So in the rest of this conversation, we're going to think a lot about how it is that we get kids this blend of expository, active, and interactive learning that collectively help students access, process, make sense of, and ultimately kind of own really deep and higher levels understanding of content. So one of the approach to distance teaching, well, an approach to teaching that has a really strong research base and is pretty clear how you could put that into a distance or blended setup is this idea of a flipped classroom. And what a flipped classroom says is it talks about a sequence of these three types of experiences. Traditionally, it's actually done as a way of teaching in kind of the before times, as people say, a way of teaching where kids get some content before coming to class. They might read something, they might watch a video, and then they have some type of work they do with it. And because most people now know Khan Academy works like this. Kids sit, Mr. Khan or someone else does a demonstration, kids watch the skill, they then do their practice. And as they practice, actually, they're taking what could be some type of informal assessment. And if you plug that kind of Khan-like model in, you then think about going to class the next day and the teacher getting to see, okay, I gave my students were learning and algebra, they were learning something in algebra, how to handle parentheses and isolate variables, something like that. They've done 3.2 turns out to be the number in my son's algebra textbook that I was working on today. That's where this example comes from. Not on Khan, but you know, you do section 3.2, and as a teacher, you come in and you realize that kids are really struggling with the negative sign. What happens if there's subtraction and kids just don't know how to handle the negatives? And kids come into the interactive portion of class, and a teacher then sets up that period of time. Maybe there's a brief reteaching where the teacher goes and says, I saw this mistake a bunch of you made, here's how to do this. Or maybe the teacher sets up something where kids solve it and they discuss which approach is right, why one is more correct than the other. And students really find ways to interact around the part of the content to help explain to each other how the math really works. And that interaction becomes a key portion of the teaching. And let me just, okay, one more second here. Okay, I was just reading chat quickly. So as I'm talking about interaction, I just want to highlight here why it is so important, and this notion that regardless of if you're in a distance only hybrid or actually kind of a normal in-person instructional environment, interaction among the students is super important. And the first reason is because social, emotional, and academic needs are intertwined. There's probably the most classic in research understanding of what teachers is, boils it down to the interaction between students, their teachers, and content. And it's in that interaction that students have the opportunity to really make meaning of new ideas and really deeply understand them. And it's really important that there is a safe and positive classroom community where especially younger, but I will say I'm watching with my high schooler, also older students actually need very clear instructions about how to work together, what to do when they're in groups together. And I think the only other thing I'll say on that slide is just understanding that this is social, and we know that kids, all adults right now, in some cases are really feeling the pain of isolation, but it is also for academic rigor, that kids really need to be able to interact again with the teacher, but also super importantly with each other. So to get to these periods of time that are set up for student interaction, we need to think a bit about teachers and just kind of take that perspective for a day. Right now, we probably shouldn't be filling teachers' days with Zoom all the time. This may be a bit less of an issue in Illinois, but in California, especially in elementary schools, teachers don't necessarily have a prep time every day or and time built into their schedule for their own learning and collaboration with each other. And we are asking teachers to make a major shift in how they're teaching. You cannot expect that to happen consistently if that is happening only on their own free time over the summer, on weekends, in evenings. And it's especially important to understand that I know I've seen in chat and heard in advance that your district may be hybrid right now, maybe it's shifting, who knows what's going to happen. around here in California, most places, places are starting to go back into hybrid, but we're all pretty certain that at some point in time, schools that are hybrid are going to go back to distance only for a bit. This back and forth each time requires different plans for teachers. If we want teachers to do really engaging instruction, they're going to need to find simulations. There are great websites for that. They need time to find them, figure out how to use them. Not just troubleshooting technology, though that's really important, but thinking about how to set up an environment somewhat mediated by technology. How do you set up student interaction is no small feat. Also talking with teachers, and I'll say we as a former teacher, we're used to reading the room. We have, people joke, have eyes on the back of your head or whatever else. You're trying to always pay attention. Who's drifting off task? Listening a tiny bit to the group working over on the other end of the room, watching their body language, figuring out almost intuitively for an expert teacher, though it isn't, but it's almost, you realize that group over there, maybe you need to go support them right now because they seem like they're struggling or getting off track. You can't see that as easily with breakout rooms. There are some strategies, but we need to give teachers the time and the resources to learn how to handle this new environment if we're going to expect them to do it well. And the last thing that I think is really important, and this flies in the face of this idea of what real school looks like. As a parent, real school looks like my kid heads out the door at a certain time, they go to a building, and I don't see them until some other time later in the day. We don't necessarily realize when kids are going in and out of independent work or group work, when they're listening to a teacher, when they're doing a worksheet or a project by themselves. We don't see any of that. But there are times in a typical day, and there's a picture down here of an example of where a student is doing something very active, but also pretty independently. And activities like this can be happening in homes. A student appears to be working with manipulatives on some type of math problem. That does not require other people to be there. It could be happening semi-synchronously, which would mean that kids are sitting there on video independently working, so they could one way or another raise their hand and get a teacher to help. The teacher might say, kids, you can shut off your cameras so you're less likely to have Zoom gloom. But there are pauses where the teacher's role is not to be providing teacher-directed instruction up in front of the class, presenting information. It's to be creating times for students to work independently and engage actively in the work. But, and this came up in one of the chat comments, parents who have kids at home are really noticing that it's hard. Not all students are remaining really engaged and motivated in those independent times. Again, with my parent hat on, I know that sometimes when I check in on my kids and they're in breakout rooms, the videos are off and it's dead silent. They're supposed to be in there collaborating, they're not. So for right now, I don't think we have any particular, there are strategies, but teachers have not received the supports they need to figure out how to implement them. And we have to recognize that students.
Turn your mic back on. Thank you.
Thank you. I have no idea when that happened. Interesting. I don't think I did that. Okay. So the last thing that I wanted to talk about briefly is hybrid instruction, because where are you right now with that decision, Jen? Jen or whomever else, you were the last person who talked, so someone.
Doug?
Yeah.
Sure. So we've been bringing some small groups of students in throughout the year. Typically, some of our students where remote learning is just not working for them, and we need to do some in-person. Most of those have been in very small one-to-one to very small group situations. Just this last week, though, we are, as you know, well, maybe you know, we have 21 elementary schools. So we have a small amount of students we're bringing in as a pilot group. So we have 31 classrooms, which is, and we offered an opportunity to bring in small groups of students to see and try to test some things in that environment before we open it up broader than that.
Mhm.
We have extremely small groups. It's only 2 half days a week,
Mhm.
which is a frustration right now. But at the elementary level, we were concerned about trying to teach students in person while at the
Mhm.
same time having students at home,
Yep.
especially at the elementary level. So our current structure allows the teacher to teach those students in person in the morning in very small groups. Most
Mhm.
of our groups right now are under 8. And then in the afternoon, she or he would have the rest of the students.
Mhm.
Those who were maybe our B group of students who would come in the following day, as well as our remote learners, and be kind of face to face with them in the afternoon. So
Got
that's
it.
what we're currently doing. We do have a plan
Mhm.
to bring in more students.
Mhm.
However, in Illinois right now, the metrics are not going in the right direction, which is causing us some concerns.
Yep. That's super helpful context for me. I think so when I think about hybrid instruction, um, and I will again say kind of as a parent watching the Facebook groups around here and just the discussion around it, it is super polarized. I think it is in a lot of places. I think this is one of the places where we go back to that opening slide of like the elephants in the room. Right now, distance work learning is not working for some kids. There are a range of reasons it isn't. And people feel really differing levels of need for childcare. How important is it for me with my high school and middle school kids to have them out of the house all day? It's hard. There's some parts of my job that are tough to do, but I can't imagine my 2 very active boys if I was trying to work with them when they were in kindergarten and 3rd grade. I would have lost my mind. And there are other people, as I said at the beginning, who the situation is far, far more challenging than just gray hairs on my head, which is kind of where I am. And so when people are thinking about hybrid and what model they want, I think it's really important for us to take this moment and pause and hopefully hold on to an understanding that lasts far beyond COVID about all of the things we count on schools to do for our society. We count on them to educate, and that's the thing we talk about the most. But there are very, very many more things that we rely on them deeply for. They make our workforce able to go to work. They handle health screenings, they catch cases of abuse, they feed our kids. There's so much that we ask of schools. And when we think about hybrid or fully distant, we just need to remember when all of this is over, whatever the new normal becomes, we can't forget what we're putting on schools right now. But as a parent, so what I want to say to all of you as you're thinking about hybrid, I think it's really important to separate out all those other things you might be relying on school from the academic learning, and understand that hybrid is not necessarily better or worse from a purely academic or educational perspective. If your kid is at home and it's well designed, your kid can still have and get engaging instruction that is interactive and appropriately rigorous. It's still possible. However, we do really need to think, and it sounds like your district is thinking through, when are the kids who are physically in the building? What types of needs are they going to have? How are they meeting them? How are we going to meet the needs of the kids who aren't physically in the building at that time? I know some places that are thinking, well, we're going to get video cameras in each room, and the teacher is going to be videoed the whole time, and some kids will be watching the video from home and other kids will be interacting actually in person with each other and the teacher. And there are strong opinions on both sides of whether or not that's a good idea. I think at the end of the day, what we want to be thinking about, because research doesn't tell us how to do this at scale at all. It's completely silent. We've never tried it before. We really do have to think about the needs kids have that are beyond academic needs. And we have to think about, as we're designing that schedule, what exactly does the pedagogy look like for teachers? And are we giving them the supports and the structure and the schedule to be able to deliver that high quality instruction? And that does really include one-on-one time, time to follow up, tutoring outside of the distance learning. One-to-one tutoring is a very cost-effective intervention for kids who are behind. They don't necessarily have to be certified teachers. There's a large research base that talks about how to do that well. Thinking about whether for kids who really struggle, if they can't be in school, can we find ways to try to do something like this? What are the ways of really supporting the kids, of increasing motivation? All of those things need to be considered, but I do want to urge parents to not have a visceral reaction about what's going to happen to kids learning based on whether kids are hybrid or not, because good instruction can be provided kind of regardless. And lastly, there's a link to the PACE website. We've done a bunch of work on COVID-19. The Annenberg Institute at Brown has, I think, a really excellent set of pretty short research briefs in their project Ed Research for Recovery. I strongly recommend them to people. They're maximum about 6 pages, and they've taken top experts in a range of fields: how to help kids who are behind, how to do distance learning for English learners, how to accelerate achievement, a range of different things. If you want a really strong research base that's digestible, I think that's an excellent resource. And you can feel free to reach out to me as well. And now I'm going to peek into the chat, and just, if anyone has questions, I don't know how you want to handle questions with an size, but I'm.
Thank you, Alix, so much. I mean, that was extremely informative. You know, we needed, I think, that global kind of national perspective, because sometimes we do live in our own bubble thinking we're the only ones dealing with this. And so I really appreciate that. I know a lot of people reached out to me privately as well, saying, where can we get a copy of what you're speaking about and the resources? So I'll make sure at least this last slide is shared. And trust me, now that I have your email and phone number, you're going to get some calls. Because this was fantastic. I think Karen has curated some questions for you. Karen, do you have those on a document for her that's shared, or?
Sent her a message kind of summarizing sort of the main things people were asking about.
Okay.
And that's in the chat?
It's in the chat, but.
Okay, let me see if I can.
Several questions about special needs, and particularly those learners.
Yeah.
Learning, there were several questions on that, as well as the emotional social needs as we either return to school in person or not.
Yeah. So let's talk about IEPs. First, you know, the IEPs cover a range of different needs. I think it's really important to not group them together. There are a lot of high incidence needs that are relatively minor. And then there are some kids who typically in school get a wide range of support, some of which are harder than others to provide over distance. So I think one of the big equity questions that faces districts right now is this question of how hard do you lean into the fact that some kids have greater needs than others? And as a community, are you willing to say, if there are some kids who seem to be suffering more at home, are we as parents whose kids may be not having an ideal experience, but are doing better than others, are we willing to potentially relinquish some in-person time for the overall well-being in our community? And I think that it's really important, speaking to all of you as a group that's focused on equity, I think it's really important to be willing to have those really honest conversations, reflect on that. And if this is something that you value, understand again that this is a very politically tumultuous time for leaders. If you value this, and it's important, I think figuring out how to support your district and school leaders and taking what may be in some circles unpopular stands is really important, because the kids who tend to get the greater share of resources in schools, all other things constant, are those whose parents are the most outspoken advocates. I was talking with someone about a large data set in California, and they were looking in one particular district And in one particular district, the distinction in terms of the kind of prior academic track record between kids in the honors classes and in the high schools and the regular track in the high schools was non-existent. What was different were indicators for race and for free and reduced price lunch. And the kids who were in the higher tracks tended to be more privileged. Those parents succeeded in garnering additional resources for their kids. That's not to say that happens everywhere. It's just to say it's something that I think we really have to guard against and really think about how important equity is and at what point in time we're willing to say, you know, it may be harder for some English learners to process English remotely over mediated by the screen. Are we going to prioritize them getting in? Are we going to prioritize some of the students with the higher needs or those types of things to really try to balance, you know, to really try to meet equity? There's also a question in the summary about keeping kids emotionally and socially okay. And this is something that I'll say is a huge issue in the community I live in, which very unfortunately has had suicide clusters in the past decades. And there's and my kids go to school in Palo Alto, California, which unfortunately you may have heard of nationally for this. And there's a lot of concern, actually. I know since COVID, there have been among staff and students 3 suicides. And so there's a really heightened awareness about mental health. And schools definitely fill some of that role. But I think I also hear about a range of different parent reactions to the current situation and frankly, parent needs. It's not just risk tolerance. There's also some elements of actual risk and risk factors in homes. And I think it's really important to think about the school as one of the sources of emotional support for our kids right now. I will say I'm deeply grateful that my kids get to play soccer. They have teammates. The soccer is modified. It's, you know, it's not contact, you know, but it gives kids a social environment. And I think it's really important for parents to think about how, in ways that match the risk tolerance of our family, can we provide kids opportunities to interact completely socially with others. And as we're thinking about schools and schooling, to think about how teachers can be supported to learn the ways of teaching that are effective for building interaction. What tools are built into Zoom that you can use? How can you use, let's say, Zoom, but also Google Documents, so you can check in on the different, you've sent kids into breakout rooms. Each breakout room has a Google document and a particular process they're supposed to follow in the group work. You as a teacher can hop into different breakout rooms, but you can also look at the Google Docs to see which groups aren't making progress and to monitor that actual work is going on. It's not the same as if you're in classrooms, but there actually are techniques to help teachers learn how to do interaction mediated by technology, and really finding the time and the ways to help them, I think are really important to help make that engagement, increase that engagement beyond what we saw last spring, and in most cases are seeing this fall over distance learning.
Alix, I have one question for you that a parent asked, but this is also a question that I often get even pre-pandemic, is that how do we best support that, you know, if we have that bell curve, we're talking about IEPs, we're talking about honors AP students, but there's that middle of the bell curve as well, that often those children feel really lost. The parents feel really lost as well. And do you have any suggestions on that subset of students?
Yeah, I think that is very difficult. One of the things that I think comes up here is just to some extent in this current situation is just checking in with kids. Some schools have reorganized adult roles to have adults actually checking in with any kid. Right now, those kids who are, as you say, in the middle of the bell curve, maybe they're not turning in assignments all the time. Maybe they're skipping class more than they should. Are there ways you can have someone reach out and connect with them to say, hey, we missed you. How are you doing? Some of those cases actually, you know, we're finding are cases where the bandwidth is limited, and the kids who might be able to do better, the bandwidth is there are too many devices. Here in going to locally in Palo Alto, we have a real housing crisis and often families living in RVs, and one hotspot may not support all of the bandwidth needed for some of these families. And just really trying to understand the difference between an issue like that, which is leading to lower student performance, or if there are issues, you know, that are graver, if it's just boring right now. Some kids are thriving, others are really not. And that adult checking in to understand the issue, to listen to the families, to figure out what things will work for the families or make it better. I think there's a much higher need for information right now to understand where each individual child is, regardless of whether they have a particular label of an IEP or GATE, what's going on with each family, and how can schools support. And as I say that, just again, reminding people and understanding that educators are working really hard. At least out in California, we have a situation where the state gave basically no guidance. And so principals are trying to calculate how many masks am I going to need per week? Where do I get, how do I negotiate for, you know, getting the PPE at a decent price? Like all of this stuff is going on. And so really both raising the need to schools, but also doing that with an empathy for educators and some grace for them as well, knowing that they have, you know, you're talking to superintendents who didn't know what an N95 was a year ago and are now being asked to figure out how many they need to order to get their teachers union to a place where they're comfortable that their members will be safe teaching. And so it's, communication is important, but all things we ask, I think we just have to ask with a bit of grace and understanding that everyone's in a tough spot right now.
That is a wonderful way to end, because that is absolutely what we need and our community, I think, has to be sometimes reminded of that it has to be taken with some grace. We are all trying to do the best we can as parents, as kids, as teachers, administrators, all the way up to the superintendent. So thank you, Alix, as well. I hope you can stay around for a little bit.
I will. I'm
yeah,
looking forward to hearing, so I will be here.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I'm going to let Gadir take the screen now, and we're going to introduce Jen Rowe. And it can be, these are the speakers coming from our district. So we have Doug Acarius, our Deputy Superintendent, Jen Rowe, Laura Rosenblum, the Assistant Superintendent for Elementary, Michael Doot, the Principal of Hill Middle School, Laura Nyland, the Director of Digital Learning, Tanya Monem, Instructional Technology Coordinator at Matia High School, and Rachel Mahmood, a 5th grade teacher in our district.
All right, thank you guys so much. Dr. Gallagher, thank you for filling up our cup tonight. I really needed that. So thank you for validating and affirming the work that we do. So my name is Jennifer Rowe, and I'm the Executive Director for Educational Equity. And I just want to say thank you to the PDAC team for having us here and putting on this great event tonight, and also to our amazing staff and leadership and board members, all of, that are here tonight. So one of the things with our equity team, we always like to start our presentations with a land acknowledgement. So I want to continue that as we move into our portion. A land acknowledgement just gives us an opportunity to recognize the Indigenous people that were on this land prior to us. So at this time, I would like to take a moment to recognize that as members of School District 204, that we're gathering on the ancestral land of the Potawatomi. And I would like to thank their elders, both past and present. So thank you. So really quickly for me, this part is just to give a little information about what we're doing with equity right now. Was able to meet with our building level equity leaders today, which is a new part of our equity work. We know that equity, as my friend Dr. Rachel Mahmood always talks about, how this is not an individual activity. You know, it really takes a team. It's a team sport and effort. And so we have our building equity teams, and those leaders get together once a month, and we're really actively engaged in that work of how we can keep it going, because we know during the pandemic that all of those inequities are really magnified at this time. So I'm so proud of them and the great work that they're doing. Our equity ambassador teams are folks, Tanya Monet, who's here, she's one of them, along with Dr. Rachel Mahmood tonight. So our team, one of the things we decided to add to our Learning Together work is to have an equity challenge. And we had our first equity challenge for October, and it was focused on Indigenous peoples' history, just to kind of get us prepped for Indigenous Peoples Day, which was on October 12th. And we're going to relaunch that at the beginning of November for folks who missed it as we move into Indigenous Peoples History Month or Native American History Month. Another activity that we were able to do just to, again, to celebrate culture and our focus on reading was our Latinx Heritage Mystery Reader Week. And we worked with our cabinet and our equity ambassadors and also with the Aurora Police Department, where we were able to pop into our classes and read some books to our kiddos and to classes focused in on historic figures from Native American or from Latinx community, and then also with Latinx authors. So it was a lot of fun. We will be continuing with our Mystery Reader series for Indigenous Peoples History Month next month as well. So we're really excited to get to go into classes again. So those are just a few things that we have going on right now in terms of equity. And the little image here is of our equity badge. So we're trying to get everyone to celebrate and showcase all of our learning together. And Ms. Monet put that together for our first equity challenge. So that's what I have for you. And I'm excited to see what our team is going to share with you about remote learning.
Hi, I'm Dr. Rachel Mahmood, and I teach 5th grade at Georgetown Elementary School. And I'm kicking off talking about some of the inequity that we are seeing in our elementary school classrooms and what we're doing to bridge some of those inequities and help build more equitable experiences for our elementary school students. So like Dr. Gallagher had mentioned, schools do much more than teaching, and I'm sure a lot of these themes are going to be reiterated. So I will summarize as we go through the different grade levels as well. But one thing that we're seeing is an inequity of academic resources. Students are not having the school supplies needed to participate in some of the even remote learning activities. Parents have definitely purchased less school supplies this year. So doing activities that are off camera are a bit harder. Getting access to having books in hand has been more difficult. Our school district has worked really hard to offer book checkouts. I see Lisa Firstnow here, librarian at Brookdale. I saw her posting on Twitter that, you know, we're doing a lot of book checkouts. Students can drive up and pick up books. Additionally, teachers across the district have packed school bags for students. So we have included a lot of supplies in there to get students going with their e-learning or remote learning so that it's not all computer-based, especially at the elementary level where there's still so many skills with cutting and gluing and other things that are needed. We are seeing a lot of issues with bandwidth. Students that come from more economically disadvantaged homes or have less economic resources are struggling more with bandwidth. And working at one of the schools with the highest number of free and reduced lunch students, I'm definitely seeing that, and so are other teachers. One thing that I know that teachers in my school building are doing, as well as teachers across the district, we talked about this with our equity ambassadors today, is having a little bit more grace for understanding why students might need to turn off their cameras to improve the bandwidth in their homes, and why they might keep themselves on mute and stuff like that. Having some conversations about understanding and helping students navigate those bandwidth issues. Like Dr. Gallagher had mentioned, especially coming from Georgetown, where a lot of our students are on free and reduced lunch, we have a lot of students that are dependent on that meal. It's great that the state of Illinois has provided free meals, breakfast and lunch for all students, but many of my students cannot get to the schools to pick up their lunches. I do remind students every day at 11 o'clock that lunch pickup has started, and ask them if they need help getting their lunches or if they have somebody to grab their lunch for them. I see Melissa Cameron, one of our PTA members at our school, online today in our meeting. She's helped to organize along with our Georgetown PTA, actually a lunch drop off. So they're actually helping parents who might have kids at home by themselves, and parents helping parents to drop off lunches to students who can't get up to the school to pick up their free lunch. So just another way that we're leveraging some of that stuff. Even though school's still responsible for, we help out a lot with dental and glasses and other things like that, we're still in constant contact with our health, our nurses, our school nurses and health aides to talk about ways that we can support students with that stuff. I know being a 5th grade teacher myself, I see a lot of issues with caretakers. A lot of students are home alone in the 5th grade and they are caring for 2nd grade and 1st grade and other students in their homes, or some of them are being cared for by middle school. So we have seen a lot of inequity in that way. They don't have a parent they can turn to. I'm a mother of a kindergartner and a 4th grader, and they're home remote learning too. And if my kindergartner can't find the page, she comes and finds me and I can quickly find the page for her because I'm here. For our students that don't have that parent there, it's definitely been a struggle. And again, that comes with a lot of grace. I know that there are teachers calling each other. I might call a 2nd grade teacher and say, hey, I just want you to know I'm noticing this about a student that, you know, we share the family and we're working together to help those students. I know also we've worked with a lot of our families to help arrange daycare and other resources for them to match them up with resources. We are seeing a lot of inequity with supports and tutoring, especially across the district. You work in a school where students need a lot of support or support services and they can't get to those services. We are providing a lot of our services over remote, but just as Dr. Gallagher said, our school is definitely differentiating for students that have higher needs, and they have started to bring some students into the building that remote learning is not working for, and there are some services being delivered in person as well. The nice thing about the way services are being delivered is because of the Zoom format, there seems to be a little bit more flexibility in some of the scheduling and pairing with different students and how the support services are able to come into the Zooms at the elementary level. So we are seeing that there are more students sometimes being serviced than would be in the building at times. The last inequity I'm seeing at the elementary level is some of the cultural barriers. There already were barriers to parents understanding the way the school system worked when we were in what Dr. Gallagher referred to as that traditional classroom setting or traditional school setting. And so it's been a huge hurdle to help those parents that are already struggling to understand that system, to figure out how to understand this system now. And so I think one of the ways that I'm seeing a lot of teachers trying to bridge that system is during direct communication and relationship building. And I think one of the biggest things that have come away with the remote learning, what I've seen with my colleagues is that teachers are making deeper relationships with parents and having more communication at times, direct communication to help parents navigate that system, and really relying on community resources to help those students out. Those are just some of the things that we're seeing at elementary level. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel.
Thank you, Rachel. I'm Mike Dutdut, and I'm the principal of Hill Middle School. So I'll be sharing out some of the challenges and barriers that we saw at the middle school. One thing that was, I guess, helpful, you could say, is that we got to experience remote learning early to kind of see what some of it was. We were all thrown into that very quickly in the spring, and so we had to make do with what it was that we had, and kind of our experience and knowledge that we gained from going through that helped us really lay out what we thought would be the best lesson in school delivery in a remote setting for this year. So I broke mine down into predictable challenges and less visible challenges. There are some things that you realize instantly when you switch from in-person to remote that you have to be able to fulfill. And so those are what I look at as like our predictable challenges, things that we expected. So the access to learning piece for everybody, of course, requires technology. And so a lot of what I'll go through is going to echo things that Rachel shared that were specific to elementary school, but are also challenges that we've had at the middle school. With access to learning, you have to make sure that all kids have that technology. And bandwidth is something that you don't think about until you don't have any. And so that impacted a lot of the students. So the district and the middle schools have done a good job of working around this and figuring out ways to provide the access and the technology to the students the most. And so we're in a good spot to begin that school year with everybody having technology that works, a system for returning it and getting it repaired as quick as you can, as well as providing opportunities as we hear about things for kids to get them access to Wi-Fi or access to a hotspot. So these are all things that we had to learn on the fly and adapt to because kids were relying on us to be able to provide that so they could connect with us. Aside from that, there's the obvious technology piece, but there's also access to resources. So if you think about what a school typically supplies for the kids, it is everything they really need to get through that day. Things that jump out that you don't think about is if you had time set aside for kids to read a book, they're used to having access to the library. They're used to having access to books in teacher classrooms, and they don't have that. And so we really worked hard and learned a lot from last year to prepare for this school year and make sure that any kid that had any barrier we're able to meet. One thing that is, I think, probably the toughest is looking at how we do traditional school and the importance of that. I really agree with what Dr. Gallagher said about the instructional piece is very important, but a lot of the things we're preparing kids for in the future relies on that social interaction, being able to problem solve, work with people, being able to disagree appropriately, and that social piece, which you miss out on when we're in a remote setting only. So we looked at instruction and breaking that down. We also looked at the fact that everything that you would typically do in a classroom takes much longer. So the simple process of taking attendance takes a lot longer. It also takes us a lot longer to be able to identify needs that students have. In a typical setting, a kid can walk down the hallway, you can go in the lunchroom, you can identify right away when there's a need that a student has. And that's extremely hard through Zoom and through a remote setting. So our instructional periods were broken down into blocks, knowing that we were going to need a lot more time for teachers and kids to be able to establish that relationship. We looked at the importance of social emotional learning. That's important whether we're in school or learning remotely. And how do you build a program that's robust and supports the needs of those kids in a remote setting? So across the middle school, we've always had a second step program, which teaches kids everything they need to know socially, emotionally, all the way from goal setting to being able to handle a disagreement with a peer. And that's an important piece. So when we looked at designing that middle school schedule, we wanted to make sure that there was ample time to support that social emotional need. As much as kids, and I think about my own kids, will say they don't like routine, they don't like structure. It is good for kids, and I do think it's good for adults. And so we wanted to look at having that routine and that structure set out. One barrier there is there are kids that are at home, as Rachel said, and all across the district that are really taking care of their younger siblings that were not quite prepared for that. You have grandparents that are not used to that technology piece that have to support a student who's in third grade on a Chromebook. So all of those are very, very tough things, and those barriers are really, they're evident for everybody. So there are people that would have maybe not had struggles in the past that will have that with this remote piece. So it's not necessarily a parent that's absent to provide help and support for a kid. It could be two parents that are working from home with 3 other kids that are all trying to accomplish the same thing, which is school or work, which can be very, very tough. We also wanted to look at the ability to provide support and intervention throughout the school day. Kids are able to touch base with teachers, interact with people, get help when they need it. So we had to figure out a way to do that in a remote setting, which the teachers have done a phenomenal job accommodating that. So teachers have set up different ways to support kids. One of them that my middle school group started to implement, and other middle schools have as well, but is a fishbowl support. So it's a live Zoom, and students during their unlunch time, because they're not really eating lunch there at school, were able to use that time to touch base with teachers. And I sat through a lot of those, and it was amazing at how many students use that as access. And some of the students, I don't know if they necessarily needed academic support. They were really starving for that interaction with our staff. So that was something we had to make sure that we put in place to support our kids as best we could given the situation that we're in. And we also wanted to make sure that we supported that social interaction and collaboration. So through Zoom and through Google Classroom, there's opportunities for kids to interact. There's opportunities for kids to work in small groups together. What was interesting is that in my line of work, I don't think that until this year I'd ever been on a Skype call. And I thought, how foreign is that for me as a principal to not have done something like that? But when you see kids that are using that technology, that are interacting with each other as best they can remotely, that was something that we had to make sure we had the ability to do through technology and also offer kids that opportunity. There's a lot of less visible challenges that you don't see. I think when we look at barriers that impact students, if you look at just the resources that some students have available just because of financial means, there's resources that families don't have that have never struggled with anything before. And so if you look at parent involvement and the ability for parents to support kids while they are working from home, that is a struggle. So we did see that there were a lot of different barriers to different kids, different families that were not barriers before to families in our regular setting. One thing that impacts that, or one thing that's important, is that quality learning environment for the kids. And so if you look at all the kids and the parents that are at home working, that is tough to set up that quality learning environment. When you come into our schools, into our classrooms, we have rules, we have control over that, but it's very, very hard without that adult in there that has that ability to manage that learning environment. And even kids in middle school are not great yet at setting up a learning environment, managing themselves, managing their time, and that executive functioning piece, which we do a lot throughout the school year. So what we did is we looked at all of our specialists that we consider experts that can provide support, and we built in time to make sure they had that opportunity to meet with those kids, to meet in small groups, to make sure they provided the kids the self-management and executive functioning things that they needed to be successful. One thing that jumped out pretty quick for us, I know at Hill Middle School, when we started in April with our remote learning, is the cultural barriers. So there is a difference, I think, for kids that come from another state or another district into 204. And we've known that, we've experienced that before. We're able to bring kids in, acclimate them, and get them in a good spot. It is so much harder in a remote setting. And I think about some of our kids that do not speak English well, or their families might not speak English well. And there's just a lot of barriers that are there that we're able to meet in that in-person setting, but it's very hard in a remote level. What was interesting is delivering a Chromebook to a parent that came from another country that did not speak English and walking them through the registration process, introducing them to the teachers and introducing them to peers right in the middle or towards the end of the school year. And so that is a tough transition in person, even harder in a remote setting, but it was amazing to see the other kids welcome that student, as well as staff members and other staff members outside of middle school that also supported that parent as well and got them through something that was completely new and completely different. So our staff has done a good job of responding to some of those things that you don't see, the less visible challenges, and stepping up to make sure that equal educational experience is there for all of the kids. Other challenges that you don't always see is you don't understand stress and trauma that kids face every day in their house until you're teaching them and they're in their house. And so there was a lot of things that staff would pick up on, even in a remote setting, that they knew something that kids needed additional support in some way, shape, or form. So I was impressed with how teachers responded and picked up on cues that you typically are able to pick up right away in a remote setting. So all the things that we do within a school is so important and so vital for our kids and for our kids to be successful and to respond to their needs. And it's very hard in a remote setting, but I'm impressed with, I think, all the workarounds that staff have come up with to make sure that we support kids that absolutely need that opportunity. We did have also issues with kids not having materials that you would think every family typically has. Most of what we have for a kid is at school that they need, and we can supply it if they don't. But things that are simple as a sewing needle for a student that wants to, that's taking a fax class or a sewing class, we're able to provide those things for those kids. And so it was a lot of work, and there's a lot of things that we did to make sure that every kid had an opportunity to be successful. And I think in that short amount of time, our staff, across the district did a really, really exceptional job of responding to what the needs are, knowing that every kid's home environment that they're learning in is not equal. Now, I would say that we've not fixed or eliminated every single barrier, but as time goes on and we get to the hang of this remote learning piece, we are able to respond in unique ways that helps all the kids be successful.
Thank you. Thank you, Mike. That was really informative. Great. I just want to, before we get Tanya on here, we have about 10 minutes left. If it's okay by all of you, I absolutely understand if you need to drop off. We are recording this, so we'll make sure that it is available on our Facebook page, but we will go over probably just a few minutes tonight. Go ahead, Tanya.
Okay, good evening. My name is Tanya Monaim, and I'm the Instructional Technology Coordinator at Mateo Valley High School. And all the issues that Rachel talked about and Mike talked about at the elementary and middle school obviously are also present at the high school level, but sometimes those can be a little bit less obvious. Kids are older and they're able to handle a lot of that stuff on their own. And my position as instructional technology coordinator is really to support the students and the teachers on how they instruct and how they use the technology. And when we talk about instruction and we talk about instructional technology, we always keep the instruction for it front and center. That is really what we're focusing on. What is the goal? What is the objective we're trying to accomplish? And and then we talk about what type of technology can we use. We know that a lot of times, in this remote environment, when you're dealing with a different technology, that sometimes, you're trying to listen and learn in this new environment and learn the technology. So my focus has been in working with the high school teachers is how do you define your objective? What is really the core of what you want to teach? And how can we best do that in this remote environment where we have a little bit of a different schedule? We are fortunate at the high school level that we do have a full-time person at each of the high school levels, along with the LMC director at the middle school and elementary level. They do have someone who's designated as a tech liaison that also does that, and an LMC director that also does to support that. Going back to some of the issues that, we talked about connectivity and bandwidth, we do know that there are some families and students that do not have reliable internet. So we do provide hotspots to those families and students that need it. And in high school level, we do try to provide some self-advocacy and for students to learn how to troubleshoot. So we provide guides and support to our students as well as they encounter both technical issues and also if they don't know how to use a certain app or technology. So I'm available for them to access and move from there. So that's how we support them at the high school level in terms of technology and instruction.
Great. Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that. Next, we have, next slide, Laura Nyland. Welcome, Laura.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Thanks so much for having me. It's awesome to be here and listening to everything that everyone has to share. And I just want to send a shout out to all of our teachers, all of our administrators, every one of you that have spoken so far. Everything that Dr. Gallagher shared, I can say in one way, shape, or form we are doing and supporting in our district, and that makes me feel very good as an administrator and former teacher and as a parent in the district. So I'm going to talk pretty fast, but I thought I would invite you guys to take a step back in time and out of 2020 get out of COVID for a little bit and go back to 2013. I'm sure no one will mind leaving 2020. I just wanted to give you the big picture of where this district has been and the vision that has been set by district administrators, our Board of Education, and building administrators and our teachers. We have been, since 2013, offering online classes to our high school level students. Since 2013 up until this year, we were part of a consortium that was made up of District 203 and 200 as well. And the vision that was set was we were going to come together to build capacity and understanding of what true online, good quality online learning will look like, could look like for our students, knowing that in the future, not knowing about COVID, but knowing in the future that our kids, to be future ready, are going to have some of those skills that we can provide them in an online environment. So loving that so much of what's been said tonight are things that have in a microcosm type way been happening in our district. And I will say that the why was really truly to offer different experiences to students, a different delivery method in order to meet all of our students' needs. I can tell you personally as a parent, I've had 2 of my kids take online classes through the district, and my one child, who is that quiet, never speaks out during the class, just came alive in an online environment, which that made me happy as a parent. And I could see my child just flourish in a way that would not have been happening whether had he been in a face-to-face. So that's some of the positive things that happen. And then I also want to just focus on the personalization in terms of how we can meet the needs of all of our kids. In our online classes, we have set it up in a way that we obviously can change the place of where students learn. It can be in their school when we were in school. It was also wherever they want to learn. It's, outside of school, at the library, at home, whatever meets their instructional need, they get to kind of decide that. And we also offer kids the opportunity to learn at their own pace, which is something that is not always available to us when we have so many kids sitting in a classroom with us and we see them for 43 minutes and they move on to another class. So that another piece of it has just been really nice. And we're seeing all of this now in a COVID way, but it's been really cool to see all of this evolve over the years. And just some stats that I thought that you might be interested right now, and this was already prior to COVID, we had about 500 students had signed up last spring for online courses and that are presently taking online courses on top of their remote learning classes. During the summer, we have a very robust summer program. 2,600 of our 204 students were able to take classes this summer to either just move ahead for other classes they wanted to make available in their schedule, or cool too, prior to COVID, we would have students in the summer all over the world joining classes. So those are things that technology offers us that was once impossible. And then I also just wanted to really just mention to parents that listening to Dr. Gallagher and really what true good online teaching and learning is, we tell our teachers all the time that good teaching is good teaching. But we have really tried to focus this since COVID this summer with PD and that social interaction piece, which we all talk about is so important and can so easily go away in an online environment. And we really help teachers to understand that it's student to student interaction is so important, student to content, and also student to teacher. That really brings in the SEL pieces as well. So lastly, we do provide all of our online teachers prior to COVID about 20 hours of PD where they really dig deep into what quality teaching and learning is in an online environment. So again, thank you to our district administrators. Thank you to our board who saw the need for this many, many years ago. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Laura. Thank you. And then we have Next speaker, sorry, it's covering it up at the bottom of my screen.
Siley, it's me. It's Dougie Curious.
Thank you so much for coming. I know you had a slightly long night last night, so I really appreciate you taking the time to come today.
Of course, thank you. My name is Dougie Curious. I'm Deputy Superintendent for Indian Prairie School District. Thank you to the PDAC board for this great evening of discussion and listening. I really appreciate it. Also, thank you, Dr. Gallagher, for your presentation. It was great to hear many of the things that we tried to plan for, but I did take a screenshot of her information so I can also reach out and look at additional supports that we can do to support the staff in our district as well as our students as we continue to make different shifts. So I know one of the things I also wanted to say thanks to Jen, Rachel, Mike, Tanya, and Laura for your presentations tonight. It just makes me proud every time I see all the efforts being put to strive for both equity and excellence in this district and to support all learners. So thank you. I was asked a little bit to talk about some of the parent surveys that we've done, and it seems like we've been doing quite a bit of surveying to try to get a gauge on our families, but it's also really important for us to know the numbers. It makes a huge difference in what we're trying to do to keep all students safe and to try to provide the best level of education that we can. In our most recent survey, when we surveyed the parents, we're very unique to any other districts that we talk to about the number of families that feel that the safest thing to do for their child is the remote learning environment. We had, under the survey, 55% of our families felt comfortable sending their child for in-person learning. And that was the question. It wasn't will you, but did you feel comfortable? So when we actually did our hybrid selection, we actually saw that 43% selected in-person instruction. So that was quite a bit less than where we were thinking some of those numbers were going to be. It was actually quite helpful in some of our planning, especially at the middle school, in trying to envision how we would meet the needs of both students in school and students at home. Right now, we've done that for second quarter. We do envision that for the second semester, we'll be providing another opportunities for families to be able to have a choice. We will be offering things in remote learning for the second semester as well. One of the things we tried to do right now is ensuring that students were able to keep their teachers in the current environment. We saw that as an important factor coming from our teachers as well as from our families. They love their teachers, and I understand why. We have great teachers in this district, and in any environment, they try to do what is best to get to know those students and to try to meet their needs. Since this was really about remote learning and equity, I just want to talk, you heard me talk a little bit earlier that we are having some pilots going on right now. In addition to those pilots, we are actually bringing in some small groups of students at different levels. For instance, at the high school, we had some students come in while other students were at home, so we can start testing what that would look like. Obviously we are thinking that there are some things that is that appropriate for all age groups. At the high school level, when we surveyed the students who were at home as well as the students in person, the students at home said they kind of enjoyed the experience of zooming into the classroom when the teacher was seeing, because they got to see the teacher interacting with students in a live fashion and actually gave us some good feedback about that. We do see some concerns with that, especially at early childhood through second grade, on whether students can just zoom in and watch and gauge what's happening. But we are trying at some different levels to see what that looks like. We are concerned. This is, again, new for our teachers. I think you heard Dr. Gallagher say there's really not research on this, not research on trying to teach students in the room while other students are at home. There's limited research on remote learning in general, and a lot of it's with older students, but it's very extremely limited, if any, on students in the classroom and at home at the same time. We're trying to gauge technology needs. We recently placed, well, it's actually should be arriving this week, 1,000 microphones/speakers so that the our teachers can both hear students at home while they're in the classroom, and that the students at home can hear the teacher better if they are a little bit more mobile in the classroom. We're looking at other technology needs to be to make that as the best learning experience we can provide for both the students in person and at home. We are looking at what professional learning is needed to support our teachers in that environment. We're also looking at parent education. We did do our first parent university this year, which was on Chromebooks. Looking at equity, we did add Chromebooks this year for kindergarten and first grade, so that all students would be able to have access to a Chromebook. So we immediately saw that there's probably a need for families that were going to be new to Chromebooks and how to work that. And we had over 7,000 views on that parent university. We have another parent university opportunity coming up on the 26th of October. I believe it's 7 in the evening. We'll be doing more communication on that. And that's going to be on Google Classroom. Most of our students are getting very proficient with Google Classroom, and we want our parents to have a good understanding of Google Classroom and why we would utilize that with students. And then, you know, an important part to us was access to all coursework and our teachers. There were many concerns over the summer when we were looking at an online academy and not being able to offer as many courses for our remote learners. And we knew that we knew very quickly, especially with our through our survey about how many families were looking at remote, that we weren't going to be able to do that in an equitable fashion. And so what we're doing in the pilot right now is going to help us to make sure that our students can access all coursework with our teachers. Those are all the things we're looking at right now. I also appreciated what she said about giving our schools a little bit of patience and grace, because there is not a lot of research out there. And our teachers, as you also heard her say, they're doing so much. There's a lot on their plates, just as there's a lot on our parents' plates, our students' plates. And I think as much as we can work together to support all and provide that feedback, we'll grow together as a community and really learn from this. And I think there are going to be things that we learn that will change how we do education in general from this. So with that, thank you again for this opportunity. And I know, I think I'm the last one on our presentation side. So thanks again to everybody who presented as well.
Thank you. Thank you, Doug. Thank you for taking the time and all the hard work that you're doing. We see it and we really do appreciate it as a community. So I wanted to thank you to everyone. I mean, majority of you stayed. We only lost a few of you as we went over. So, you know, usually in our meetings, we're in the CEC for a while and then in the parking lot for another hour. So this kind of continues in that tradition. But I did want to make sure that I invite you to our next meeting. One of the silver linings for PDAC has been that so many of you can join us and that we also can reach out nationally to get speakers. So next month, I'm actually inviting a friend of mine who I have been trying to get to speak at PDAC for many, many years. Her name is Anurima Bhargava. She was the chief of the Educational Opportunities Section of the Civil Rights Division of the DOJ, and she led the federal enforcement of civil rights laws in schools and institutions of higher education. She is also a founder of a consulting company that helps K through 12 and higher education institutions on issues of civil rights. It's called Anthems for Us, and she is a fellow at the Harvard Kennedy School where she is teaching. So obviously a very experienced person for our next topic, which is on social justice. I think we're in a moment in our history where we cannot ignore this need to discuss some of these difficult topics when it comes to social justice and education. So please do sign up. Our link is open at pdac.eventcombo.com. Please do sign up for the next meeting as well. Our year-end event, we have no idea what we're doing yet, so we're just going to park it there, but hopefully we'll do something that's more of a celebration that can get all of us together and talking. And we were really hoping to try out our Zoom rooms today, but maybe we'll wait until November and December to do that. We may have to have a 2-hour meeting in November because Anurima is very engaging. And I think the topic will allow us to have some small breakout sessions as well. Next slide, Kadir. And this is just a way to keep in touch with us. I know many of you have been reaching out to us. We have literally talked to hundreds of parents since COVID started for all kinds of issues. And then we have connected you to the proper people at the district level, or we've gotten involved in advocating for you. Facebook for our demographic, trust me, that's the easiest way to reach us, even though it can be a little difficult to handle, but follow our Facebook page. We try to post important articles, information, and particularly about our meeting on there. We do try to tweet. I think Rachel is the only one of us that really uses Twitter. So thank you, Rachel, for tweeting during this meeting. But yeah, we will try to do better on Twitter. Again, we have our IPSD website, which is a subpage on the main district page. We do post articles on there as well as our schedule and our meeting notes. And thank you again for joining. It's a pleasure to virtually see all of you. Stay safe, wear your mask, wash your hands, the same things I tell my kids every morning. And thank you to all the teachers and speakers and parents that came today. Have a good night.